Hello, welcome everyone to this Between Two Bots podcast episode. Today I have with me Hitesh Ramani, Deputy CFO, as well as the Chief Accounting Officer at a great partner of ours, UiPath. I am Ahmed Zaidi, your host. I'm the Chief Automation Officer, as well as the CEO here at Accelirate. We've been a partner of UiPath for a very long time. Thank you very much, Hitesh, for giving us some time today. Can you give the audience some background on yourself?
Thanks, Ahmed. Thanks for having me here today. My name is Hitesh Ramani. As Ahmed mentioned, I'm a Chief Accounting Officer and Deputy CFO at UiPath. Been with the company for over 5 years now. And prior to joining UiPath, I was a partner at Deloitte, spent 20 plus years at the firm, advising my clients from everything, including IPOs, scaling businesses, thinking about people, process, systems, automations. Happy to be here and share some of our own insights as we implement UiPath within our own finance and accounting team and all other customer interactions I normally have in this space. So again, happy to be here.
Perfect. No, that's a very interesting transition. At one point, you're telling all the customers about all the stuff that they need to do. You see all the problems that they have. You see all the areas for efficiency and automation, and now you're at an organization that actually gives that platform to people to be able to do that. In the CFO organization, Deputy CFO, Chief Accounting Officer. You put your signatures on a lot of stuff. You attest that a lot of the numbers are right. You're an extremely regulated environment, not only through your internal audits, as well as the industry and the government bodies that regulate you. The numbers that you produce can move markets, affect stock price, things like that. So, how does being at UiPath as well as being in a regulated environment in a regulated sort of area within the company, how does that shape your thinking about agentic AI? Like everybody's talking about how agents are gonna be commoditized with everybody becoming doing automation and analysis at the same time using these agents. How do you think about it, AI and agentic AI, especially in a regulated environment?
You're right. UiPath is a public company, and therefore, we are accountable to the regulators, be it SEC. We are subjected to an external audit under the PCOB standards. Also, we are subjected to our stakeholders, which are our investors in the company. So, we have to operate like a regulated enterprise from that standpoint, and therefore, everything an enterprise thinks about with regard to their processes and controls naturally apply to us. If you rewind the clock back up, and think about how enterprises would think about designing controls within their own environment, especially under the SOX framework, when you think about people, when you think about processes and systems, making sure that you have enterprise grade processes, what does that really mean? It means that every time a transaction, goes through a process or a controls framework, it is accounted for properly, consistent with the company's accounting policy, and produces an outcome which is very consistent. It makes sure that there is the right level of accountability that is there on the control owners, making sure that they understand the input, they understand the process, and they understand the output, which then makes its way into the financial reporting that the company presents outside. That logic still continues even in the world of AI or agentic AI, is understanding what impacts a number or what impacts a control that is in place. So as companies start introducing or incorporating agentic AI, you have to think about what are different variables that go into a process. For example, when you look at agent or agent builder, there is a context, there is a prompt, there is the models behind it, and then there are evaluation sets. Understanding, who is responsible for drafting the prompt or providing the context or making a decision on which model to be used for what purpose. And then someone has made sure that there is a proper evaluation or user acceptance testing that has been performed, and making sure that the outcome is relatively consistent, after providing similar information to the agent, that the decision making is relatively consistent, which is very similar to what is being done today by humans. If you think about it, if I give you or one of my revenue accountants revenue contract to review, and understand the underlying terms, evaluate the terms in accordance with our accounting policy, and then provide me what are the performance obligations and accounting for each of those performance obligations. That is being done consistently for any given set of contracts. The expectation is the agent will process a similar contract in a consistent fashion, and the variables that will have that decision making impact is needs to be understood, and make sure that we have properly designed controls. There is proper observability that those controls are in place, making sure every time there is a change, the change management controls kick in. When it comes to an agent who has access to the agent, agent administration comes into play. So thinking about this in a slightly similar fashion, but in an evolved mechanism, that because there are different parts of this agent development process that can have a impact on the outcome is very essential. So that is how we think about it differently, especially in the regulated framework. So while we can go and build agents looking at some wipe coding tools, the question is, does it provide similar level of enterprise grade, ability to have that auditability for our external auditors and for even the internal management who is ultimately representing to the outside world that the information produced is highly reliable, complete, and accurate. And that is where enterprise grade technology comes into play, which will allow you to adopt newer technology, but without compromising on quality in form of governance and observability both.
Perfect. Look, I think that's a good level setting sort of beginning. Uh, You mentioned, we mentioned regulatory bodies a few times here and auditors. What type of explainability bars are the regulators actually setting? What are they asking for? Obviously, um, we went from deterministic to agentic to including deterministic and agentic back together, and then saying, hey, listen, some of this stuff should remain deterministic, some of this stuff needs to be agentic. I personally think that the deterministic stuff was pretty good. Leave it alone, and then the parts that we left that we didn't want to attack with sort of the traditional AI sort of sentiment analysis, natural language processing, that type of stuff. We said, okay, let's leave that alone and leave that to the humans. But even then, we would sort of look at the controls and say, hey, this used to be the control here, and this control was here because fat finger protection, for instance, and now the robots never do a fat finger error, so it's always correct. So we don't. How do we change those controls? This data was being input by a human, now it's being input by a machine. How do we change the controls? This transaction was being processed by this. This is the four eyes check we had on it. So we look at controls sort of even then, but now sort of and then you would be able to go back to the regulator and say, this is how we modified the controls. With agentic, it adds another layer of sort of non-deterministic sort of outcomes. And again, look, if you go back to sort of, looking at making loan decisions through AI models to say propensity to default and things like that, or propensity to pay and things like that, looking at various factors, you still had to explain those. So people had built those into sort of explainability models into traditional AI stuff. Now you have agentic models, which generally end up using LLMs. So how do you think about, as you talk to the regulators in your position or in the industry overall with your peers, what sort of explainability sort of requirements are coming through from the regulators? And again, look, man, you work for UiPath, so I'm going to ask you this. How do you think UiPath helps in that arena?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, if you think about, an enterprise process, that process can be carried out fully manually, or you can transform the process and make it automated. The objective is as companies continue to scale, they don't have unlimited resources to keep processing transactions manually. And that is where this intent of transforming or automating a process comes into play. When you are transforming or automating a process, enterprises have always ensured that the outcome is always certain. It was binary. Either
Yep.
an automation does the work or automation breaks. And it could be a system. You may implement a system or you
Yep.
can create a robotic process automation. But the objective was always very clear. If I process a transaction, the outcome has to be always certain. Why it is important? Because as long as there is accountability placed on humans. That accountability be it placed by a regulator, be it placed by a customer, or be it placed by an investor. The objective is humans are taking that accountability, and therefore humans are ensuring that the transactions that are getting processed in an enterprise has always certain outcome, right?
Of course.
So that is a framework. Even the regulatory standards are designed, whether you call it the COSO framework, which is the baseline framework for designing business controls, whether you call it the NIST framework, which is the baseline framework for designing ITGC controls, or you talk about the PCOB standards, which is a framework for the auditors to go and test these controls, whether they're designed, they're implemented properly, and they're operating effectively or not. All of those frameworks in its end state is ensuring that the outcome of a given transaction which goes through a process, whether it is a manual process or an automated process, is always certain. So that is the
Hmm.
baseline because of the accountability. Once you understand that baseline, then the question becomes, in the traditional world where we were automating through a system implementation or an application or a robotic process automation, the outcome can be tested using a user acceptance testing. And you would always know that if I provided a rule-based problem, you always get a certain outcome. And
Yep.
that could have been easily tested. What is now happening is ability to automate is going beyond rule-based into cognitive.
Hmm.
And this is where the probabilistic technology such as agentic or AI coming into play. And so the question is now, can you take certain aspects of those business processes were cognitive in nature and transform them using agentic AI framework? And the viewpoint is yes, the answer is absolutely it can be done. But the pressure point there is the results may be variable because
Hmm.
it's actually a probabilistic technology.
Absolutely.
So that is number one. Number two, not only it's a probabilistic technology, it comes with a higher cost. Then the question is, if you know that A, the technology itself is probabilistic, therefore the outcomes can be different each time a transaction goes through a process. Of course, the level of accuracy is only improving as models become better and better, as
Yep.
contexts become much better, and at the same time, but the operating cost is also there. And
Yep.
so businesses want to first make sure that they don't compromise when it comes to accountability, right?
Hmm.
As I mentioned, regulators, customers, investors, all of them are focused on
Of
that.
course.
And therefore, if given a choice, especially to someone who leads finance and accounting in any organization who's operating in a public company or in a regulated setup, they always want to make sure that they are laser focused on certainty of outcome. So, yes, while they want to become more efficient, they cannot compromise on the quality. And the better alternative is deterministic automation, rule-based
Yep.
automation, because rule-based automation will give you that, either it's working or it's not working.
Yep.
Where the world is now moving is okay, so if I can solve something using rule based, let me go and solve rule based. And if I have exceptions to rule based, or if there are areas which I cannot solve it rule based, can I apply agentic, where agentic it is actually performing a substantial amount of work and brings human in the loop without compromising on accountability. So that is how we are thinking about. Now, when you think about explaining this back to an auditor under a given framework, that is the logic saying, okay, I take given process, I understand the steps in a process, I say these steps are all rule-based steps, and therefore I've applied deterministic automation, and I can prove it to you the way I've built it and I've tested it and deployed it. Versus this is where agentic comes into play, and I am now infused each time there is an agent with a human in the loop where ultimate accountability still remains with the human, and how we are ensuring that what are the variables that are going in building those agents. And when you take that end-to-end process, that process is designed with the most efficiency in mind without compromising quality, at the same time allowing the business to scale. So that's a perfect balance that you're going for. And once you explain that in the relevant framework and the standard back to your external auditors or to regulators, then it naturally sits. Of course, there is a lot more work that needs to happen. COSO, we've started seeing some of the changes that are being proposed in the COSO framework. I yet to see some of the more concrete auditing standards evolution. But one thing that is becoming more and more clearer is almost every enterprise, the way they've operated prior to this versus the way they are expected to operate in future is going to be totally different. And therefore, it's a matter of time. There will be more regulation in place, and there'll be more guidance that will be available, to companies which are operating in regulated space in terms of how they need to go about implementing some of these things. And of course, we are on the forefront of it because as UiPath, as I mentioned previously, we try to use our own products first internally. We
Yep.
do, as a company, have 72 agents in production, not all of them in finance, but across the company. And we have some in finance as well. And each place where we have put an agent in production, we've ensured that that control is still with a human formally until the regulators, pick up the pace and start providing more incremental guidance in this space.
Perfect. Look, I've been taking mental notes on a couple of things that you mentioned. It's a good segue into the next topic that I wanted to discuss, which is sort of where you see the value and what the opportunities are. And I'll come back to the human oversight angle in a little bit because I think that's important. You're absolutely right. And then, from our perspective, I'll talk through some of the things that we do to make sure that that human perspective is there. But let's go talk about a couple of other things, right? Within your purview, right? Where are you seeing? There's two things to it, right? So in the beginning, we saw, oh wow, 9 out of 10 conversations that I have with customers, especially on the business side, happen like this. Hey, I did this in ChatGPT, it can do it. So I know it kind of is agentic automation, agentic agents can, or an LLM can handle this. So then they look into certain areas within their organization and say, okay, these processes that I was doing sort of with people, I think I can address through automate through sort of this AI. Right? I'm purposely trying to hold back that automation sort of thing, but they think they can apply AI to that area. But as you take that to through your thought process of controls and actual technology and the context and how these things work and they have we've talked about these things where I can take an agent and it can do a Google search and do some things and then how do I make sure that it only looks at certain sources and not other sources and how do I so those technical complexities start to arise and then that starts to create sort of confusion because where you say, hey, listen, I could do this very easily sitting on a chat interface with ChatGPT. Now I'm trying to ask IT to put this into an agent, and they're saying, well, all these things, and it's not doing the same things because, in my opinion, a lot of things that we do while we're interacting real time, we filter, we sort of prompt, we recognize some of these things without even thinking about them because it's our knowledge and we know how to do these things. So we say, oh, I can ignore that and I can't ignore this, on and so forth. But it becomes more difficult to do it technically and then explain all of it. Where do you see sort of both creating agentic AI sort of creating immediate opportunities and sort of also in the same vein, where do you see opportunities that look like a lot of opportunities but create confusion in terms of what can and cannot be done? So if you could talk through sort of your journey yourself internally as well as what you're seeing with the customers on where the areas are, where the most confusion is, and how to handle that stuff.
Yeah, and it's an interesting question. It also brings us back to some of the confusion that is there within an enterprise on how to transform them. If you look at it, bulk of the companies are still focused on, personal productivity. They equate to providing everyone a cloud license or an open AI license and think that, okay, they are transforming the company using AI. Of course, each of the knowledge worker on the back end is using those licenses to transform some element of what they do it, but it is mainly focused from a personal productivity standpoint. When you think about enterprise process transformation, you are trying to understand how most of my transactions within a company are getting processed from start to finish. We think about the broader process, right? Within that process, then the question becomes, what are those natural areas or opportunity that you have where you think those are potentially the right use cases for you to go and implement AI? Of course, when we started our own journey, we immediately received almost more than 500 ideas across the company. This is more than a year ago. And one of the big questions that came in front of us was, are those all valid agentic ideas? Number one. Number two, if so, which are the ideas that we want to really put them in production versus put them in back burner? And most of them were actually agentic ideas. I think the question becomes, if you look at the enterprise process and understand, where are, and we did not think initially at the onset from an ROI perspective. Initially,
Hmm.
it was more of a proof point, making sure does it work. So we went after different types of opportunities. For example, a human fielding a Slack channel, whether asking legal or asking Deal Hub for license provisioning. So that Slack channel, can it be now fielded by AI first? We went after areas where a quote that is being generated, can it be generated by AI first? A contract that is reviewed, can it be reviewed by AI first? And then we also went after some end-to-end processes within finance and accounting. For example, at month end, we have a process of creating a a general reserve on our receivables, and also a special reserve for those areas where a customer has declared bankruptcy, is unable to make a payment. We need to create it's a month-end closing activity where we evaluate our receivables balances and then decide whether we need to provision them or not. So end-to-end process, can we have a component of deterministic automation, agentic AI, which can propose the special reserve, and then a human in the loop, which can go and approve the entry, right? So we've had all of each of those categories, and what we realized it is, uh, if you have a more complex problem where you said there is a lot more context and experience that you normally have from humans. For example, I use contract review. I have 12 micro agents powered by three different models.
Hmm.
Uh, when we started embarking on journey, we realized you could have built one macro agent, but then that agent, the quality might have struggled because
Hmm.
there are each of the component, you need to be more granular. If not, it gets hallucinated. Again, I use
Yep.
hallucinated word loosely because models have really become really good. But I feel like in an enterprise space, as I mentioned, you need to get to as close to certainty as possible. So our ultimate design was, we broke it down into 12 micro agents, and then we also realized that there are different models which are really good at doing certain things. There's one that reads table better, understands table better. There's another one that reads, images better. So depending on what you're trying to achieve, a good combination of models and ability to break down the idea into smaller ideas while balancing your overall cost was the right approach in that particular fact pattern. And how we're thinking about it going forward is, we are going after more process heavy, transaction heavy processes with lot more human touches, so that we can go and take those and try to automate, again, use as much as possible deterministic automation, and wherever we have ability to complement that with agentic AI, so that we build a full automation and have a better ROI on that entire process transformation, is how we are currently thinking about it.
Got it. Look, I think you touched upon a couple of things there. Let me ask you, is the opportunity more about speed or scale? Look, I come and I'm sure you've been around for long enough to understand that, when you went to IT and said, "Hey, I want a system," sometimes it was for cost reasons, sometimes it was just for capability reasons, right? So we kind of, I come from an IT sort of app dev outsourcing type of world where, we talked in years of sort of deploying. And then when I started this like 8 years ago, I was like, oh my God, we're talking about a 3 month production deployment sort of for process automation, which is, end to end, define the process, document it, develop it, test it. And the development time was probably a month and a half, if anything, 6 weeks out of that, right? So that was speed and scale for me at a pace that was not sort of the traditional pace, right? Granted, we're attacking smaller things, not as large as you did other places, but still, the speed at which you could deliver was much faster. I think again, we're with coding agents and things like that. You're still. Is it about speed and scale for you, or is it about doing things that you possibly could not? I think about it this way. 3 years ago, if you asked me to, take in a contract and say, hey, can you give me the payment terms out of this, and can you tell me what the whether there's a termination for convenience clause in it, and where this and that. NLP would do somewhat of a decent job, but it was a big training exercise and this and that. And now today is just out of the box. You drop the document into something and you get that. So there are things that you just couldn't do before that you can do now. So how do you is in your opinion, is it about doing things that simply were impossible a few years ago, or is it about speed and scale, or is it both?
So I would start with, first of all, if you think about deterministic automation, and I use that word more cautiously than using robotic process automation because it can be otherwise the siloed to RPA itself. Now,
Hmm.
combination of RPA with API for a minute. Um, and you can also attach IDP and other, flavors to it to call it a more comprehensive deterministic automation.
Yeah.
There were two limitations to it, in my opinion. One is the ability to build before you operate, and second was the operational ongoing maintenance, let's say. Those two were slowing it down, and it had a lot of energy that was going in that build and operate space.
Hmm.
um, the build part, as you highlighted, understanding the current state, documenting the PDD, they call it process design document, then, a solution architect doing certain things, and then you're designing it and building it and then testing it. That process is the traditional process, which took, a substantial amount of time. And for me,
Yep.
when I joined here and when I got my first taste of it, it looked like, a very heavy process. If that could be compressed, it will
Hmm.
allow enterprises to transform much more faster. That is number one. The
Yep.
second big limitation was the operate part, which is when if there is a change in the process, which businesses go through significant changes, that automation breaks and then you have to again, fix it. And that process took the maintenance aspect that I mentioned.
Hmm.
And with the concept of coding agents and healing agents, we are able to solve both of those. So ability to build much faster
Got
and
it.
ability to fix much faster without compromising on your deterministic automation. So I feel like that is in my mind, the more effective way to use AI is you use AI to build and to operate from that angle without underlying solution, which is actually still deterministic. And if you think
Yep.
about Claude for a minute, you go and ask Claude a math problem. Claude is actually on the back end using calculator to give you the output, right? So it's an
Yep.
AI which is understanding a question, but it's for solution purposes, it's calling upon a tool, which is a deterministic tool.
Yep. Yep.
It's
Yep.
a rule-based tool. So that is a similar logic that is applied here is for my building purposes, understanding my user requirements, for my what do you call operating, which is healing agent to make sure that I go and fix an area where the automation breaks, and even for testing purposes. These are the core areas where you can go and start using AI to your advantage, build, deploy much faster, and be more efficient with it.
Got it. No, so do it faster and do things that you couldn't do before. We talked about regulatory sort of things. We talked about deterministic and tools. Good segue, right? I look. I think there are two things. By the way, what you mentioned about those two areas, shameless plug. We built a company on top of that, right? We build and we support, and we did that early on, recognizing that those are going to be two areas where people will need help. And now we're trying to figure out we're all going to go through this together to see how we can continue to deliver that value much faster, right? That's one thing that's been on our, we're called Accelirate for a reason. It's always did that. It's like, how can we do this faster? But interestingly, we've talked about a few things. One of the very interesting things I always said was initial days of RPA, we were focused really on task automation. I mean, let's be honest with ourselves. We're taking a bunch of tasks, putting sort of humans in the middle to take it from one to the other, and then with sort of orchestration layer, and I think Agentic gave it a lot more focus. Sort of how do you orchestrate a true process? Because now we're starting to think about full processes, right? Before it was just, hey, can you take this data, put it from here to there? Can you take it from this system, put it in that system. Even with IDP, can you take this document, extract a table and a structured thing out of it, then I'll give it to somebody to take a look at. But now you're actually saying, hey, take this invoice, figure out what are the line items in there, see if you can figure out what the GL mapping code should be for the line items, see if there has a PO, give me a difference between the PO and the invoice, and it's sort of more higher level full process, which requires sort of true, as you mentioned, like Claude is using that one tool. In here, you might be using multiple deterministic tools, multiple non-deterministic sort of micro agents, as you call them, right, to do things. How do you see sort of orchestration playing a big role? And along with that, you guys have introduced case management and all of that in the platform as well. How do you see the orchestration layer, especially in your group? I mean, finance is sort of one of the first areas for automation in a lot of organizations. So how do you see the role of orchestration playing, and how do you think about orchestrating these things from a start of a transaction to the end of the transaction?
If you look at, and finance, I agree with you, is a greater uh, area where most of these use cases would resonate extremely well as a starting point, but it can be applied to the mid office and front office as well. But finance organization normally play with end-to-end processes. If you think about areas where we used to do task automation, those were the opportunities mainly where I would say systems were lacking. Inadequate use cases where some system vendor is still working on a roadmap item, or you had some legacy systems and some modern systems, and you're trying to do some task solving.
Hmm.
That is what history has been so far, and that's why the main focus was, hey, I have these gaps in my systems and I'm spending a lot of time, humans are spending a lot of time, and I would like to go and solve it, right? So in fact, we coined the term digital FTEs. If you recall,
Yep.
the logic was, there be a digital full-time equivalent, employee which can actually, the robot can go and solve some problems.
Yep.
When the concept of agentic came into play, now you are saying we can now go and orchestrate an entire process. So because now you're talking about a different system of engagement or system of action. So what is this world of AI has done is try to create a bifurcation between system of record and system of engagement. And why it is important, because that engagement is done by humans, by AI agents, by your deterministic automations, and by enterprise systems that are in place. And so when you're saying transactions which go through a process that needs an automation touch, an agent touch, a human touch, and a system touch, requires ability to and visibility. That visibility, observability is
Absolutely.
very important, right? On how my transactions are processing. In past, it was literally one paper going from desk A to desk B, and from desk B it goes into system, and then output comes out, goes to desk C. So now you want that ability to orchestrate, because you are seeing there are the types of touches has evolved, and
Yep.
therefore you need that level of observability. And the question is, when you need that level of observability, and it's not just, or because there is also confusion in terms of orchestration. There are several folks who think about agent orchestrate or agentic orchestration is similar to process orchestration. I think we have to understand there is a difference there. Process orchestration is
Absolutely.
much more broader. It is a surface layer within an enterprise for on top of an existing process. When you think about finance and accounting, let's say procure to pay. What happens in a procure to pay process? If you need to process an invoice, the three-way match, making sure you get an email, understanding what is in the email, is there an invoice that's attached, bringing it back to the person who actually bought the good or the service, understanding whether there's an alignment there, and then afterwards, submitting to your AP for, making the payment. That entire end-to-end process, when you think about it, it may have, a system touch, an agent touch, a deterministic automation touch, and then human touch. And that is where UiPath Maestro comes into play. That is where Case App comes into play. So you need to make sure that you have that tool that provides the ability to orchestrate that end-to-end process. Again, we think this is very important, especially when you tie orchestration to a platform that provides you ability to now transform your rule-based problems, transform your probabilistic problems, or even allow you to bring human or outside agents in that process. Not necessarily your own agents, but
Yep.
it's no different than, okay, I can hire employee A, I can bring agent B from maybe another system of record company agent or someone who's built an open source, LangGraph, LangChain agent. Bring all of those things together, allow them to, orchestrate the process with the right level of auditability and observability is what UiPath Maestro and Process Orchestrator is trying to solve.
Perfect. Look, I think one thing, with your permission, I'm going to use that system of engagement. That's actually pretty cool. I don't know if you coined the term, but that is actually so. System of record, system of engagement. Absolutely. I think you're absolutely right. And I keep telling people, hey, look, this is the system of engagement. This is not system of record. If you want your, we can give you all the process and work related metrics, but while we can produce some of the metrics and what's the dollar value of the invoices processed through the system, what is the dollar value of the, certain goods or services sold processed through this system of engagement, while I have visibility to it, I'd rather you go back to your accounting system to do that and not take this as the source of truth. But when it comes to the orchestration of the work, I can give you all the metrics of how much time was spent in doing X, Y, or Z, and who touched it, and how that happened, and so on and so forth. So that's really interesting. So I will use that with your permission. This is the word system of engagement. That's pretty cool. We've been talking for about a half an hour now, so I want to move towards our end. A couple of things that I want to sort of practical way forward, sort of uh, advice. Governance decisions that you think, people forget about or skip or don't pay as much attention to early on, that becomes a liability later on. What do you think that is?
This whole evolution is bringing a lot of new risks for enterprise, and every enterprise needs to think about and have a great risk assessment in place
Okay.
before they make technology decisions. Even for personal productivity, when you provide AI tools to your employees, how it is being used, having a viewpoint on that is very important. The whole IP creation, legal discovery, understanding, uh, what is being produced and what is being used in a business, understanding or evaluating all the variables that I mentioned earlier. There is also agent identity, as I mentioned. So there is a
Yep.
newer type of risks that are coming in place, and that's why whenever companies are thinking about what is the right technology I should be thinking about or using within this space. Of course, everyone wants to start using AI and start
Yep.
transforming. It is one of the top three priorities for every single company, every single CEO, whether it is within their product offering or service offering, or whether for them to operate more efficiently. It is definitely a number one priority for most organizations right now, and therefore not compromising on that aspect is very important. And that is why regulators are also taking their own time, because the breadth is so wide here. Is they want to make sure that there's a very more thoughtful view on this technology, understanding, as I mentioned, the evolution of the risk landscape, and then making sure that companies are focused in terms of mitigating those risks. One of the core steps and the first starting steps is understanding the type of technology that you're going to use, and the ability that it will provide you on the back end with the governance and the trust and the observability. At the same time, it should allow you to design and operate controls, understand how your data will get consumed and the organization of data and all those things. So clearly newer space, and I think this is very important area that almost every enterprise should focus on before they decide and start putting things in production, because
Yep.
once you put it in production, it will be very difficult to retract it because the damage will be.
Yep.
So I think that's why I think many companies are taking more time, for to move things between pilot to production.
Perfect. Risk assessment framework right up front. Make sure you understand how that is. Um, Second one, how do you see companies adopting? I mean, you're sitting in a very interesting space, right? You have a fairly large sales organization. I'm sure you get to talk to them as well as a CFO in various contexts, as deputy CFO and as a C-suite leader. I'm sure you have visibility into it. Sort of, and you yourself are a finance leader, so I'm sure you get brought in to talk to other finance leaders, be it customers or peers or in the industry. How do you see companies adopting things like coding agents, BPMN type workflow builders, very similar to what you have in the Maestro, or agent builder, or case management type things to deploy faster? What are you seeing?
Great conversation with the customers, right type of conversations. Folks are thinking about process orchestration, as I mentioned, not just focused on task automation. There is confusion, personal productivity versus enterprise grade. There is still keen interest in understanding the evolution with regulatory landscape and governance and how to think about designing controls that is there. Folks are trying to understand, are there existing use cases, assets that they can use if someone has done something that is really cool. Folks are very curious, understanding some of those cool ideas where things have been implemented and put in production. Overall, including good discussions around build versus buy, good discussions around more automated controls versus business controls, and potentially transformation there also, because businesses traditionally had maybe 60 to 70% manual controls and maybe 30, 40% automated. Potentially, we're talking about shift there as well. So a lot of good conversations, and at the same time, I feel like more recent conversations are coming back towards deterministic. I think folks have experimented enough with AI, understood the limitations, understood the cost of it. You saw the Uber announcement on the token fees, token consumptions. I think tokenless is becoming a newer term nowadays to figure out how can I get there. On-prem is again, getting some legs back up. So there is a lot of, pendulum coming back, I guess, is where the discussions are happening. But overall, I would say great momentum. It has the right attention of the right leaders at the customers, right quality conversations in the direction it's supposed to happen. And some of this, ambiguity that got created is getting clarified now. And also this, it's becoming, the demystifying this concept of personal productivity versus enterprise grade. That's also happening. So I am very hopeful in next 6 months to 9 months you'll start seeing some a potential full end-to-end process solutions that will be in production, and it will be powered more by deterministic, of course. At the same time, I think folks will understand what's the right way, as I explained to you, right way to use AI. You use it where it makes natural sense versus forcing it elsewhere. So
I
that's what.
mean, you're absolutely right. I think there's, the demystifying, as you mentioned, is a big thing. I think people are starting to understand more and more how LLMs. It's interesting now when we talk about AI, all we think about is LLMs, but the AI existed before that as well. But in today's world, people have started to understand how these LLMs work, at least at a high level understanding of tools and deterministic sort of, in a different context, tools that will help these LLMs do things more in a more repeatable and consistent fashion than just coming up with the next random word type thing, right? Sort of that I think helps with adoption, and you're absolutely right. I think there have been certain sort of platforms that have sort of made a fortune being that system of engagement, not the system of record. But I think in the context of automation, you guys are fairly well positioned to be that system of engagement. I really appreciate all the time that you gave us today, Hitesh. Thank you so much for the time and the insights that you provided. We continue to look forward to working with you.
Absolutely. Again, happy to be here. Really appreciate, enjoyed the conversation. Thank you.
Perfect. All right, cool. Thank you very much, Hitesh. I really appreciate it, man. I'm gonna